I said at one point that when it came to considerations of what the Cuban Missile Crisis was about, that among many other things that was going on was an understanding at a certain level, very, very high level, that there was a determination being made. It was understood that there was going to be some sort of armed conflict engagement that was supposed to involve either United States directly or the Soviet Union directly, in a manner of drawing down on resources and allowing for there to be a material condition paradigm shift within the respective country. And part of what was going on with the Cuban Missile Crisis was a determination of the mindset and readiness of President Kennedy in order to assess whether that was going to happen in the Western Hemisphere or whether it was going to happen in the Eastern Hemisphere. Part of what was going on was a threat of an attack in the Western Hemisphere, i.e., the Cuban Missile Crisis. But there were also matters that were ongoing in the Eastern Hemisphere at the same time. There was the situation that was falling out as part of what was a massive famine in China that was compelling millions of people of Chinese from China to flee China because of starvation. This was exacerbated by what was going on with French Indochina as well, what was happening there. And the concepts of what was potentially exploitable in terms of the differences between the Soviet paradigm and the Maoist paradigm in China, as well as other things going on regionally. So the consideration was, well, is there going to be an American engagement in the East, or is there going to be a Soviet engagement in the West? I think that that was absolutely the specific paradigm for consideration. And just as things were happening in the United States, there were also things happening in the Soviet Union. Now, there's not as much information that we in the United States, at least me, that I've been able to find, have access to determining what was going on concurrently in the Soviet Union and or who they would be engaging with on that level for determining that, right? But I think it has to do with the communications that Kennedy made public between him and Rockefeller at the time, as well as things that were going on with the negotiations with the steel industry, respective to request for a cap on wages, as well as implementation of a particular tax strategy with an understanding of addressing the balance of trades, as well as defense paradigms for other countries around the world. One of the things that could have happened, though, it did not happen, right? My understanding is that what happened is a consideration of all the various factors is that at some point it was determined to be political capital viable, if not economically viable, to allow for the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which allowed for a particular kind of paradigm shift wherein Lyndon Johnson and the elements supporting Lyndon Johnson were catapulted into the White House, perhaps prematurely. And this had a very profound implication in terms of national policy moving forward, specifically connected to the energy sector and I believe the defense sector. I.e., I believe that if Kennedy had been allowed to maintain until the end of his presidency, and that the Rackets Committee work that Bobby Kennedy had been involved in before he became Attorney General had been allowed to move forward, and that that had correlated with changes in the civil rights movement, then the development of a paradigm allowing for what ended up materializing in the 80s around a decision to experiment with the increase and possibility of usage of biological weapons, as well as the various kinds of engagements that happened between the United States and other countries around chemical weapons, would not have been allowed to have happened as they were allowed to have happened after Kennedy was assassinated and Lyndon Johnson became president. One of the paradigms that did not happen, that could well have happened, is that Kennedy could have decided to take a hit, to allow for a land invasion of the United States, to allow for or to take some sort of steps or actions that would understand that there were potentially advantages to the United States long term, including in manners that would allow for accomplishing the major objectives of his administration. Were the United States to have allowed itself to prepare itself and maintain a status of readiness in an understanding that another country or group of countries was going to invade. There were various things that were ongoing that would have allowed for a recapitulation of the various industrial production facilities and processes that necessarily would have had to have changed anyway, were they to have implemented Kennedy's priorities around the wage cap as well as the tax policy, in conjunction with the effort to compel countries, specifically of Europe, but also around the world, to invest in their own national defense development domestically. See, my understanding is that the major threat was that production of steel at that time was very significantly connected to demand for military products produced in the United States as part of these relationships. If other countries were to take more responsibility for their national defense needs, that would mean they would have to increase production, including in relation to the matters in which the American steel industry would be considered relevant within their own country, in a manner that may not even have allowed for the American companies to create affiliates or subsidiaries in those countries, but instead would have invested in domestic steel sector in order to provide for their national defense needs, as well as other sectors connected to R&D, and could potentially have really significantly changed the entire context around national security development strategy around the world. Different countries drawing on their own resources, drawing on their own people's expertise, their own prioritization around their way of understanding the terrain, the different kinds of legacies they would develop in the course of coming up with a security strategy paradigm, as well as what they may or may not consider to be an actual defense-related priority or product, would have necessarily changed the consideration globally of what was acceptable as a weapon of war and or a cause of war. And this could have very significantly influenced a certain kind or certain kinds of tendencies within the United States and or others of similar ilk, in terms of determining also what was considered to be a available or essential or even acceptable military product or military strategy. Had there been a land-based invasion in the United States, there could have been a recapitulation or refactorization of the industrial production capabilities within the United States. It could have been compensated and covered in another manner. And so the question then becomes, well, is it really about Cuba? Because what else would you have to see in order to determine the actual viability of that, not only as a strategy for the United States, but with an understanding that even if you did accept a hit, you did not intend to lose. That's the point, right? Perhaps Kennedy did not feel he was in a position to win. I don't know about that. All I know is what's going on right now is not that. This is significantly different. So I just am going to request, from now on, stop saying anything in any ether that's directed toward me about how I'm in the wrong city. I'm absolutely 100% in the correct city. I am. Now, if there are other people that are here trying to clamor as if they're the ones that should be the city, it is what it is. But this is still a part of the United States of America. There has not been a formal declaration to disband the federal system, and Texas has had several years to assert a constitutional claim to secede if they understood that it was being subjected to or forced to engage in activities that violate the Constitution or the conscience of the people. It has not done that. I'm just letting you know there were always alternatives. This is not a situation where I think we're taking a hit for the team, just so you know. There would have had to have been a great deal of other factors put into place in order for it to be that. But I'm also not going to pretend that you're some innocent young girl, America, that needs to surrender. The bourgeoisie and their fetishism with entertaining that it's okay to be submissive as a way to go through some sort of psychological catharsis with all the burden that comes with concentrating power into their hands is not going to be acceptable. You've had 10 years of psyops under the illusion of medical treatment and insurance billings. And unfortunately, it's apparently not enough to cover your costs.